A very good evening and welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Tracy Shilshi and today we're taking a closer look at China's latest move to end its decades-long one-child policy, with couples now being allowed to have 2 children. Introduced in 1979, the globally criticized policy was adopted out of the Malthusian fears that unchecked population growth would lead to economic and environmental catastrophe. But today, it is the effects of this very attempt at population control that perhaps has China on the verge of an economic crisis. So, is the Malthusian theory of population still valid today? And can China actually turn around its demographic crunch? Joining us on the debate this evening, we have Dr. Somayajulu, who's the General Secretary of the Indian Association for the Study of Population. We also have senior journalist Subhomoy Bhattacharya joining us here. And we have Professor Srikanth Kondapalli from the Center for East Asian Studies at JNU as well. Doctor, if I could start with you, if you could in just brief, explain to our viewers the Malthusian theory, and also according to you, do you feel it's still valid in today's world?
Yeah, it's a good question. As a demographer, I feel that Malthusian theory has outlived. And see, when it was proposed by Malthus, there was criticism even at that point of time about its applicability to various societies. And then, as you rightly mentioned, he was giving emphasis to the economic and environmental factors and then linkages with population. But the major hypothesis proposed by Malthus relates to the relation between population growth and food production growth.
Yes.
While population grows at exponential rate, the food production grows at annual average
yes.
production
you
rate.
You cannot both are
always
yes.
there will be mismatch between the kind of population growth you are having and then the kind of food production growth you are having. So he says that to check this mismatch, to counter this mismatch, there are checks and balances that are required to control the population. But of course, he was not so in favor of fertility regulation
yes.
or contraception use and all.
Yes.
He was suggesting more natural way of delaying the marriage and then delaying the child bearing process, and so that the population pressure will not be that much. That was proposed by Malthus, but later on there were some amendments to that also by several other demographers and sociologists. When coming to this today's topic and China's experience and all, perhaps there is a need to have a relook at the Malthus theory, and then given the kind of challenges you are facing now, social challenges as well as economic challenges, particularly in case of China, you had severe social problems there. I happened to be there about 3 years back in China for an international conference in Beijing. I was there in the conference sessions, and I was able to listen to the Chinese demographers talking about the kind of problems they are facing as a result of implementing the one-child policy.
Yes.
One friend of mine was joking with me. He has a son. I have a daughter. When I told him that I have a daughter, he said, I will come to India and then my son can get married with your daughter.
Because of
so
anyway
that we are not
they don't have enough daughters.
He will not have a
yes.
girl to marry
prospective,
here.
Yeah,
like
right.
that. So that was the though he was telling a little with humor,
yes.
but that is the reality.
Yeah,
I spoke to several other demographers.
Right. And talking in fact talking about that's the other scene, that's the other facet of course of this one-child policy. Professor Kondapalli, if I could come to you, China of course has nearly a 1.4 billion population, 30% of which is over the age of 50, and like being pointed out, the gender imbalance of course with 20% surplus of boys over girls. And now we're talking about, can China actually be able to tackle these numbers with this new change in policy?
Well, I think the couple of years ago, they tried to allow a few reforms in Shanghai and other big cities, but no spectacular results were visible in terms of the pilot projects they initiated in these big cities. So it is not clear whether the two-child policy now, which has been made in the 5th plenum of the 18-party Congress, will that drastically affect the demographics is not clear. One possible reason for this is that in general there has been a lot of modernization in China. and there are late marriages. The infertility rate is also pretty high in China. With these factors, it is difficult to conceive of any radical change in the reality in China today on demographics.
All right. Subhomoy, the one-child policy, it's something we are looking, of course, at the global scenario, how people have, of course, been criticizing it for decades now. Not because China is the only country that perhaps has this kind of a policy restricting, even in India we have hum do hamare do and, things like that. But, we've got in Singapore, in Malaysia, we do have some policies like this. But China in itself, when it comes up with a policy like this, everyone likes to criticize China. But what has been the reaction to, even now, with them saying that, we will allow 2 children? What has been the kind of response that we're getting from the global community?
Well, first of all, China is a special case because nobody practiced foeticide. Countries said we want smaller families. India said we want smaller families, but India has a cafeteria approach. You select if you want to.
Yes.
There was no coercion at any stage excepting that one brief emergency period. But neither did any other country. China forced. And there have been about, estimates are very difficult, but there are figures saying like 6.7 to 8 million children were terminated because of this foeticide
and
business.
Horrific stories about how women, of course, what all they had to go through, not just families of women.
So it has been a genocide of one should call it of a scale which has not been seen anywhere in history. So it has been a huge change, and definitely the fact that China now says that we need to change it. The world, the big point is that even this 2 thing is not really there, because you are saying that if you go beyond 2, then the same restrictions come in.
Yes.
So the fear of the party and the fear of the control that doesn't go off. You're simply saying that you have 2. So essentially, as Professor Kondapalli pointed out, the fertility rates have gone down. They could have jolly well said that we abandon all ideas of this sort of a population control.
Yes.
And let people take their informed choices, which is what would show a change into a mature market-based economy. That is not still there. You're still saying 2. So whether people will actually take it on is a very difficult point, because first of all, as you said, that there have been horrific incidents. Everybody can remember those, and particularly the fact that China might again change policy. Besides that, what happens after 2?
Yes.
So nobody would really want to get into trouble. So essentially, so the world's reaction, frankly, has not been very what I might call euphoric or very ecstatic about China rolling it back. And remember, they did feticide even in as late as 2011-12. So it's not as if in the late 70s. So there is, it may be very little and very late.
Absolutely. Doctor, if you could give us an idea, since we are, and since you are an expert, of course, on the Malthusian theory, at least here on this panel, at least, in context of India, is this something that we have looked at in the past? And, since the big picture right now, we're discussing about whether the Malthusian theory in itself needs to be dumped now. Is it really valid in today's world? What has it been, the reaction to it, at least in India?
See, in India happens to be the first country to have its own official national family planning program way back in 1952. And then, as
Subhomoy
rightly pointed out, we followed the cafeteria approach. And then, except for brief period of emergency period, we had some kind of forceful sterilization camps and all. Except for that, all these years we have been following very voluntary approach, from at every level, from national level, state level, and district level, and then even the grassroots level. So this is an advantage for the couples in India. They can choose their family size. They can have their own, choices in terms of childbearing and child rearing. Whereas in case of China, it was a kind of a coercion. It is a kind of violation of human rights.
Yes.
And then gender imbalances. And then it had social implications, economic implications. And as a result of that, the working population is coming down. And then the elderly people proportion is going up. Aging of the population is emerging as an issue.
That's
I heard that some people were telling me that there are people who young people who are taking care of 2 generations of elderly people.
There's a 4 to 1
Yeah.
family, kind of a
So that is the kind
dynamics
of
that
situation.
is there everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whereas in India, we are not forcing the couples to go for 1 child or 2 child like that. But even in India, it is happening. People are limiting their family size.
Yes.
Even in China now, even with this relaxation, people more and more couples may not go for 2 or more than 2 children. They may stop with only 1 child. And there was an experiment in one of the provinces in China, and they relaxed the rule, but still not many people, not many couples prefer to have more than 1 child.
Because
of
it is
the
not easy to
yeah,
raise
because of the
children.
higher aspirations.
Absolutely, and it is an expensive
Yeah,
affair.
it is.
Yes,
because of
especially
the
in the rural
kind of
areas.
investment you have to make for providing education, health care, nutrition,
Yes.
and all these aspects. So the people couples want to have only 1 child, and then quality of the children becomes more important than rather than quantity of the children, number of children you have. You have 1 child. Way back in late 80s, when I was doing my field work in some of the places in Andhra Pradesh during my MPhil and PhD work, even that time also we found that more and more couples in Andhra Pradesh, even rural areas also, they want to have only small family. They don't want to have large family, and then provide better education, better health, and then have better aspirations for the children.
Clearly different from what families in the Northeast, of course, were thinking of. But anyway.
So it varies from state to state. For example, Kerala.
Absolutely, yeah.
Kerala again,
Yes.
you have below China and Kerala in India, they have achieved below replacement fertility level.
All right.
When you reach below replacement fertility level, obviously you will have less number of school-going children and all. As a result of that, even in Kerala, many primary schools were to be closed down.
All right. I believe we are in fact joined also by Professor Santosh Mehrotra, in fact, joining us from JNU as a professor of economics. Mr. Mehrotra, thanks so much for being here with us. We are talking, of course, the Malthusian theory, if at all it should be dumped in today's world, if it's valid at all. But we're also talking about China and how, its one-child policy has led to this kind of an economic crisis. Would you agree that this is, in fact, the policy in itself is in a big way responsible for the economic crisis that they are seeing?
No, not at all. China is still growing at 7+% per annum. Its labor force is still growing. It has become an aging society, and this final abandonment of the one-child policy is simply a response to the fact, which other speakers have spoken about, that it's an aging society, and the state doesn't have the fiscal wherewithal, the fiscal resources to create old age homes on such a vast scale, and therefore essentially it is sending out a message to the youth that you are welcome to have more than 1 child, because you have to bear the responsibility of looking after your parents. The state cannot look after that responsibility. The Chinese leadership has been saying for a while that we are at the end of our demographic dividend. And they've also been saying something very significant. They have been saying that Europe became old after they became rich. We are becoming old without having become rich. Now, so therefore, essentially the message that they are sending out by abandoning this policy is to the young people that they need to look after the parents. That's message number 1. The second is they know that the population growth rate has declined, and they want their labor force to continue to grow. That they want to extend in some ways their demographic dividend, and that's the second objective that they are attempting to achieve with this. Not that it's going to be easy, because it's becoming a highly urbanized society. Families live in small flats, and if there are 3 generations living in one flat, that makes life hard. But all the state is saying to the youth is that, you know, at least if there are two children, then the responsibility can be shared between two children as opposed to simply one child. And that helps both the parents as well as it helps the children, quite apart from helping the economy. So I've given you both the micro dimension as well as the macro dimension.
All right.
So it's a very clever policy. It's a very good policy from their point of view.
All right, but you know, there is of course another view to this as well, because you know, Professor Mehrotra did speak about the workforce and all that, Subhomoy. You know, there is also an opinion from observers, especially in the reports that we've been reading, especially since yesterday, that actually this policy has come in, the change or the shift in the policy has come in a bit too late, because if you actually add up the numbers, the workforce that they're trying to build up, it'll take them at least 20 years to actually build up that kind of a workforce. Do you also agree that this is coming a little too late?
Yeah, in fact, I'll agree with you, Tracy. I'm not very convinced that it's all that clever. As I said, first of all, the restriction on going beyond 2 remains, which itself is a very coming from China, where rules you can be very harsh.
Yes.
That is definitely a major problem. The second thing is, as you pointed out, this population, the young population, will be coming into the workforce 20 years later. China is going through a decline. Economic growth rate is definitely tapering off. Now, that tapering off, so that means you are taking a gamble that with this population, after a 20-year gap, will again be able to kickstart the growth engine. Would there be, the world itself is going through a technological shift. Employment opportunities, frankly speaking, are not expanding at the rate at which it was after every possible recession. It's not very sure if the population comes up that it will really be very useful for China. So it does come rather too late, as you pointed out. Secondly, I would like to say, you know, that what's happening is that the world itself, despite the Chinese break on their population growth for some time, is becoming a fairly overpopulated area. We by 2050 will be almost 10 billion people. By 2100 will be 11 billion. We're adding, that means 4 billion population, 4 billion people to our population. And in the middle of this, the world is going to be hotter by 3%, by 3 degrees. So that means we are in a position where there's despite all this thing about happening in China, what I'm saying is that we don't know which way the population scale will now tilt.
Yes.
It can actually, we are getting more population at a time when we had thought that the Malthusian theory has gone off.
Yeah.
But maybe we actually might face the Malthusian problem again of a rapidly shortening area of production with 11 billion population. This is something, and most of it will come incidentally from Africa.
Yeah.
So these are very, very, heavy tectonic shifts that are happening in the 21st century in this world. More people, less arable place, hotter climate, hotter planet.
Yeah.
These are, going beyond China. We don't know which way the population scales will tilt.
Yes, absolutely. Professor Kondapalli, do you agree with this? Talking about the Malthusian theory, of course, in China, it doesn't seem to have worked. But then as time goes, it may not be, exactly right to also dump this theory. For all you know, we may be getting back to it. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think the Chinese leadership consideration is basically catering to the middle class aspirations. There has been some resistance on their part on the one-child policy. Secondly, I think the urban areas where this is mainly targeted, the second-child policy, in the urban areas, there is already a relaxation in terms of the subsidies, electricity, charges, private educational things, which are basically incentives to have only one child. These have all been relaxed during the reform and opening up policies. So in that context, the target audience for the two-child policy is the middle class in these urban areas. And urbanization is expected to increase to about 60% of the population in the 12th five-year plan estimates. So in that context, I think there is the expectation from the government that they need to satisfy these middle class urban population. From that point of view, I think we would be probably exaggerating in terms of the Malthusian theory in relation to China, because it will only have a cosmetic effect in the two-child policy program that is initiated this week. Because so far the experience had been that in the recent times, in the pilot projects, the experience has been that the urban people are not having more than one child in any case. So this relaxation will not possibly have a huge impact, except in the rural areas where there is already the male preference, male child preference.
Yes.
So in that context, there could be a lot of interest for the two-child policy in the rural areas and so on and so forth.
Dr. Somayajulu, if you can, give us an idea of India, of course, not too far behind from China, of course, when it comes to population. I also read a few reports saying that perhaps India also needed to take a stronger approach, unlike what Subhomoy is saying, that cafeteria approach, perhaps they needed to be a little stronger, perhaps for a longer period, not just the emergency period. Would you agree to that? Do you think at some level, with the kind of numbers that we're talking about, these mind-boggling numbers of how the population is going to rise in a few years, is it time for countries, not just India as well, but different countries, to also revise or to perhaps tighten or put some restrictions on population control? Do you think that is a possibility? Do you think that is a good option as well?
I don't think that that will be a good option for us to control. Yes, there is need to have some kind of control
anyway
on population.
how high female feticide, infanticide numbers are anyway in the country.
Yeah, given these, even in Tamil Nadu and other parts, Salem and all, and we did some studies there in Salem to understand why more and more female infanticide was happening there and all. And then we if you restrict the family size, and then like China, like Professor mentioned, even in India we have very strong son preference. Couples want to, we have aputrasya gatir nasti. People believe in that.
Yes.
Unless you have a son, who will perform your last rites and all. Culturally, you need a son. You don't want to have more than one child. And then if the first child is going to be a female child, then you don't want to have that child. Then, it leads to all kinds of, pre-pregnancy, pregnancy stage, you will go for scanning and all these problems will come. So in my view, instead of that, there is a saying, development is the best contraception. In 1974, in Bucharest, the World Population Conference was held. The conference gave a slogan that development is the best contraception. So if you have development, whether it is social development or economic development, obviously people will have, smaller family size. You need not force them to go for smaller family size. Now, even in India, now you have to focus on the northern states, like Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, UP and all, and then they provide the educational opportunities to the girl children, and then enhance the status of women, and then provide more opportunities for women for economic, well-being and livelihood and all. Then if you do this kind of development and welfare measures, I am sure the population of, many Indian states also will be able to control the population. And then I think I prefer that rather than this kind of
putting restrictions. All right. Professor Mehrotra, running short of time, but you of course are of the opinion that this policy, this shift of the Chinese government is going to of course reap benefits. You're hopeful and positive that this is a good step forward. Professor Mehrotra, can you hear me?
Yes, but let me come to India, because the previous speaker was saying whether you have economic development or social development, it will actually reduce the population growth rate in India. Not at all. Only if you focus on health and education, which we have not done, are you going to reduce the population growth rate. the focus does not have to be on economic development. Of course, you have to have economic development go along, but that's not the determining factor. The determining factor is investment in health and education and a functional health system. A functional health system means that you will get the unmet need for contraception being met. Currently, people even in UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, which are the high population growth rate states, want to reduce the number of births they have, but because of a dysfunctional health system, they cannot provide modern means of contraception, as a result of which the population growth rate in these 6 or 7 states is still higher than people want it to be. So the focus has to be on health and education. That's the way the Chinese did it. The one-child policy came in 1979, long after they had managed to reduce their population growth rate. So it is completely misleading to talk about put the focus on economic development as a contraceptive, family planning as a contraceptive. No, the means they used was focusing on health, education. That changes mindsets, because when children stop dying at less than 1 year,
yes,
parents themselves start having fewer children. That's the bottom line.
All right, we leave
That's
it there.
the lesson for India from
Thank
China.
you so much. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. The Malthusian theory in itself, perhaps is not the time yet to dump it yet. Considering the challenges we are facing ahead as far as population is concerned. But the China story is something definitely India can learn a lesson or two from. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me.
Malthusianism is a complete red herring here.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me on The Big Picture. Tomorrow, of course, we'll be back. Monday we'll be back with another topic. Do stay with us, of course, on Rajya Sabha TV. Thank you.